Average in Wisconsin was 32%.
Oh, well, heck.
What he said?
We're winning. Practically saving money. Have we ever seen motion to table? Yeah, before. That's right. You would be for them or against it? We represent.
So you're the bad guy.
Means we don't pay you guys. At least you can tell from the point. Good evening.
That's the deductible?
Yeah.
The roof gotta be down. What's the point? The point is,
When I did
they're not gonna pay anything.
when I retired, I had full time. And the deal was that they would pay only up to the amount that they received from me for premiums. But they wouldn't return anything. They wouldn't return anything at all. If I didn't, no, and basically it was a couple dental cleaning appointments per year, was all really they were covering. Plus another $200 or $300 in kind of plan.
I had responsibility for human resources. Good chunk of the town there. Community vision offered that. It was such a rip-off. I mean, you're better off as,
Well, as an employee, it was a terrific deal, but for the people that are paying the premiums, not so much.
Right. Yeah, yeah. I don't know what it costs.
Family together, perfect
I mean, maybe, I guess maybe.
I wish to sit down and have the calm of a budget forum.
It's part of their, they have a company.
Actually tuned in to watch kids and watch
Go ahead, list it.
That's a learning experience.
And they have a go back. No one wants.
Or no, she's having
The whole industry.
Upside down. Oh, man. Okay. I guess the shareholders want to see.
Good afternoon. Wow. Dankeschön. No. Thanks for coming down to talk about the budget. Nate Brunchen, our treasurer, is going to speak, and I am not going to speak towards money. Pastor Schrader will open us with a prayer.
Let's pray. Lord God, coming out of Holy Trinity Sunday, we marvel that you are a God that is beyond our understanding. We can't figure out how you can be three and one at the same time, and yet that's how you reveal yourself as a Father who loves us, who created our world and still preserves it, who planned our salvation and sent your Son, as God the Son, Jesus, who loved us enough to live for us perfectly and sacrifice himself for us, and as a Spirit who proceeds from the Father and the Son to create faith in our hearts and work through the means of grace to strengthen our faith. We thank you for your Trinitarian blessing upon us through so many years. We ask that blessing to continue tonight and into the future. We don't know what is coming around the corner, but we thank you for all the gifts that you have given us as a congregation. For the leaders who are able to make plans, we ask that you would continue to provide us with wisdom, help us see the opportunities that we have to carry out this blessed ministry that you've given us. For our members, we ask that you continue to lead us to trust in you so that we respond generously to your grace, that we provide the blessings in return that are needed to carry out this ministry. And finally, we ask you to be with us this evening. Guide our discussion, all for your purposes. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
On? Good? All right. All right, good evening. I think I've met most of you in this room, but for those of you who I have not met, my name is Nate Bruckschen. I have the pleasure of being the treasurer here for St. John's. I just joined being the treasurer this year, so this is my first rodeo here. So I'll do my best to guide us through the discussion here tonight. But the plan is to kind of give an overview on, first of all, the current fiscal year 24, how we're doing compared to what we projected when we set out the budget about 1 year ago during this meeting here last year, compare how our actuals have come in versus what we projected, and then we're also going to present the draft version of the fiscal 25 budget that is being recommended for approval at the voters meeting next week. If there are any questions at any point during this, we don't have to wait till the end. Please feel free to raise your hand. I'll do my best to answer the question, or we have some knowledgeable individuals in the room that help with this budget as well, who can certainly help along the way as well. So as we think about St. John's and our ministry and what the fiscal budget needs to support as we think about setting this or looking back for the current year and then looking ahead to the next fiscal year, there's really two areas of work that we're supporting with our missions and the work that we do here at St. John's. The first being the work at home. So that's, if you think about everything that happens in our facilities here, church, school, ELC, and things that we do kind of within our local Wauwatosa congregation and community. Our budget also supports work at large initiatives that we do here at St. John's, and that's supporting things outside of our facilities and our direct area here. So a few areas in terms of work at large that we support in terms of our budget, synod initiatives through support of WELS, support for Wisconsin Lutheran High School, and other church-related organizations as things come up throughout the year that St. John's decides to participate in helping out with through various giving opportunities throughout the year. If we focus on the work at home, that's the majority of the budget in terms of what we need to project and plan for in terms of the operating budget. So you'll see on the slide here a number of different expense categories that go into the work that we do here at St. John's. You'll see a lot of the expenses listed on the slide here relate to people costs, our salaries and benefits expenses. We'll get to it a little bit later in the presentation, but that's the vast majority of the cost in the operating budget here is just the people that we need to carry on our work and support the mission and everything that St. John's does. A few other significant expense categories that you can see on the screen outside of our people costs, health insurance and pension, facilities operating costs, so if you think utilities and those sorts of things to keep our buildings and our facilities running, as well as individual boards and committees, so that the various boards and committees that support the church, whether that be Board of Ed, Board of Property, all the different boards that support the work that we do here. So this is kind of the bones of what the expenses are that we have in our budget, which we'll get into in a little bit greater detail here, but just wanted to provide a quick overview on the different components that go into that. I touched on this briefly a couple slides ago, but in terms of the work at large, so just a little bit more color on some of the things that we do in terms of work at large. So one way that we support various initiatives outside of our facility is support to the WELS Synod, which includes monetary support through the way of the congregational mission offerings. You might have heard that referenced as CMO. And that supports just various WELS initiatives and resources that they provide to congregations, called worker training, world missions, et cetera. So really just us as a member of the WELS Synod helping that parent synod support their operations and mission as well as they support us. Wisconsin Lutheran High School, so St. John's is a conference member for Wisconsin Lutheran High School, so we support them financially as well, and that allows St. John's members in turn to receive lower tuition rates. Another area of support for the work at large is Pastor Yu's Chinese ministry, whether that be the Mandarin services or the recruitment that's performed for students as well. And through our Above and Beyond and Council Project of the Month offerings, we also support, again, other miscellaneous WELS ministries throughout the year as our various committees see fit. So that's a lot of background on the what. So again, just a quick overview on what this presentation, kind of the rest of the presentation is going to cover. Really two things. The first is going to be where our financial resources landed that we plan for this fiscal year again. So our fiscal year runs July 1 to June 30th. So we're, 11/12ths of the way done, I guess, close to 10/12ths. So we have a pretty good idea of where we're landing currently and where we expect to land 2 months from now or 1 month from now when we wrap up the current fiscal year. So we want to give you all just a snapshot of kind of how we're looking and where we're at for the current year, and then what we're expecting the financial resource needs to be for next fiscal year as well. So if we start with budgeted receipts, or those would be considered revenues to St. John's. So our budgeted receipts for fiscal year 24, the current year, were about $2,738,000. Projected total receipts, so that's looking at actual results through April, and then projecting kind of where we think May and June are going to come in terms of offerings and tuition and whatnot. We're expecting projected total receipts to be about $2,868,000. So that's approximately $130,000 above what we projected 12 months ago for the current year. And then we'll just look at expenses. In terms of budgeted expenses, so similar amount, budgeted expenses was $2,738,000 in terms of expenses. Our projected total expenses, again, using 10 months of actuals and 2 months of projections, are about $2,612,000. So that's $126,000 less than budget. So higher revenues for the year of 130, lower expenses means that our projected receipts in excess of expenses for the year is approximately 256,000. I'll pause there if there are any questions, or I can go into specific drivers if that would be helpful for people. Overall, great financial picture, I guess, is the punchline. Yes.
Assuming some of those expenses are related to us not having a third pastor?
Correct. Yep. So that is part of it. Yep. In the budgeted, we projected kind of full staffing model, and obviously we're one person short from personnel expenses. That's actually the largest driver, I would say, of the expense shortage. In terms of budgeted receipts exceeding projected receipts, so there's a number of different factors there, a pretty good mix. General fund giving is exceeding what we budgeted it to be last year. Our ELC program is significantly exceeding the budgeted revenues from last year. And we've also had some pickups in things like school choice and the special needs program from the school. Those are both also higher than last year. So if you would add all those up, the surplus is actually much higher than 130,000. But one thing that we do or are able to do when compiling the budget is if we ever have a budget deficit, we may have to transfer money from different funds, the U Fund, the Memorial Fund, et cetera. And we actually didn't have to make any transfers so far this year to balance our budget. So that would actually show as a revenue shortfall compared to budget. It's kind of a confusing concept, but if you take transfers out of the equation, our surplus would actually be higher than it's showing on the screen for revenues. So it almost paints a less great picture than it even is. So that's pretty awesome. All right, well, that's really all I have for the current year. If anyone has any further questions on that, we can certainly get into it at any point, but we're going to shift our focus now to fiscal year 25 next year. Just wanted to, we'll start with revenues first, so I just kind of wanted to level set on a few of the key assumptions that we've kind of planned or baked into the plan for next year. So the first one is we're assuming general fund giving increase of 3% for congregation members. So higher general fund giving by the congregation. ELC tuition, we're going to see budgeted increases versus this year. A couple different drivers there. We did increase tuition rates for K2, 3, and 4. I guess K2 and K3. K4 is in the school tuition. And we also have higher enrollment next year projected. So that's also going to drive higher revenues from an ELC front. School tuition, similar story. We have some new student or higher enrollment, as well as tuition cost increase. But the most significant increase we'll see from a school perspective is an increase in the number of school choice students. So next year's budget is assuming 53 students will be eligible and accept school choice scholarships. The current year budget, FY24, there were only 29. So 29 to 53, that's a pretty significant increase. And the money that we get from state for school choice is much higher than what the families would pay to the school for. So that equates to much higher revenues. From a school perspective, again, it assumes 2 international students for the full year. And then, as I mentioned or touched on a bit earlier, when we go through our revenue projections and our expense projections, if we need to budget non-operating revenues in the form of transfers to balance the budget, that's what this last bullet point is saying. So, our projected expenses in the FY25 budget will see our slightly higher than projected revenues by about $40,718, and we're going to cover that through transfers from the U Fund and the Building Fund. That was a lot of information at once. Any initial questions? Otherwise, I can move on to the detailed slide. Pass it.
Just the building fund, would that be for building expenses?
Correct.
That are budgeted?
Yep, exactly. So that's primarily like property taxes we use the building fund for. Yep.
The 2 international students, we have more this year on that line? And is that because we have a higher increase and less space for two, only for two? Or do we just not have?
The biggest need is host families. That's the biggest constrictor. The classes are larger, so that's another piece of it, but host families.
Should I hand out the mic for questions? John?
With the general fund giving, is that 3% over our actual receipts for the previous year, or is that 3% of what we budgeted?
Great question. So the increase of 3% is over last year's budget. Yep. So that's actually going to come in around flat to where current year projected is expected to be. Good question. Dan?
Might be interesting for people to note that 53 choice students, next year we only have 2 that are new to St. John's. So incredible blessing for our current families.
That's great. Mike, did you have a question or? Oh, sorry, I thought you were raising your hand. Not trying to call you out. All right. So here's a screenshot of kind of the general or the main buckets of our different revenue sources. So I've laid out the columns to be last year's budget is first, where we project to land this year, what we're planning to budget for fiscal year 25, and then the last column is the change versus the fiscal 24 budget. So a couple just quick sound bites to note here. So in the transfers and other line, you can see that we budgeted 117,000. We've only actually transferred 15,000. So that is what I was referring to earlier on the fact that because we've been so blessed with higher revenues versus the expenses, we've actually had to transfer much less than we anticipated last year from our non-operating sources. As we look at the fiscal 25 budgeted numbers, I have some footnotes here, but I can give you the quick sound bites. So again, John kind of alluded to this earlier, but the fiscal year 25 budget is set to equal current year projected general fund giving, which equates to about a 3% increase over last year's budget. The school tuition and fees, we're seeing an extremely significant increase in revenues versus prior year's budget of $330,000. Much of that, again, is related to school choice, increase in school choice students. And again, some of those other things I mentioned, higher enrollment. The special needs program wasn't in the budget last year. That's in the budget this year. So that's another significant pickup for school tuition and fees. Early learning increase of about 54,000. So again, there's an increase in the number of students enrolled as well as higher projected revenues for our extended care and summer care programs. And then for the transfers and other bucket, again, this kind of ties back to one of the previous slides, but we're projecting approximate need of around 41,000 to cover the operating expenses for the year when we take revenues into account. Yep. Oh, go ahead.
For the increase in tuition, particularly for the ELC, is that just to kind of match what's out there, or are we trying to cover our costs in ELC basically with the tuition, try to match that? I know there was always discussion in the past about that's an outreach type of thing, so we necessarily charge what everyone else is charging, or are we trying to get more people in and maybe charge a little less?
Go ahead, Dan.
Yes and yes. So we do comparison, and we are still, I would say we're under the median for tuition. But yes, we also want to continue to cover costs. And, you know, in some cases, just a matter of looking to present a value to parents. If it's too cheap, parents are, well, why so cheap? They kind of say that already, some of them do, but then they're here and they realize we're not about the money, we're about ministry and education, so yes and yes.
Any other questions? All right, so that covers half the budget, the revenue side. Now we'll move on to the expense side. So again, laid out just kind of some of the key assumptions here in terms of some of the expense drivers that are going to be embedded into our fiscal '25 budget. So the first several proposed budget assumptions relate to, again, kind of that wages, benefits, our people costs, which is a large portion of the budget. So on average, salaries and wages are projected to increase by about 3.2%. We did propose a housing allowance increase of $800 for all called workers in next year's budget. So overall, kind of when you include those things as well as some of the other employment related costs, worker compensation increased by approximately 2.75%. From last year to the current year budget. A couple of other just items to note, just in terms of kind of key items or drivers. So Synod healthcare costs are projected to increase by about 10% effective in January. So that's a cost that St. John's takes on for its called workers. Question was raised earlier about budget and staffing. So our budget does assume full staffing, so it will again include the pastoral vacancy will be assumed to be filled in our FY25 budget. Based on, second to last bullet, based on recent news from We Energies, it sounds like costs for utilities are projected to increase quite significantly next year, around 15%. So that's included in the budget as well from a properties perspective. And then going back to kind of our work at large, bucket of ministry that we support, the current plan is to maintain work at large expenditures for both the WELS and the WLHS support at 13% of general fund receipts. So those are both receipts that we remit to the WELS and Wisconsin Lutheran High School as a percentage of our general fund giving. So we're projecting higher general fund giving, so by nature our support will increase, but at the same percentage of overall giving. No questions there. So this is similar layout to the revenue slide that we had on the screen earlier. Apologize if the notes at the bottom are a little small for those of you in the back. But you can see the breakout of the different revenue buckets here. So we have our work at large. You can see that it increased by about 3%, so that's going to be commensurate with the budgeted increase in general fund giving by 3%. As I said, they kind of have a hand-in-hand relationship. Wages is again going to be the biggest increase year over year in terms of the budget. Pretty significant increase there of around $300,000. Number of different factors are going to be going into that. So again, the overall salaries and wages increase that was mentioned on the earlier slide. All of our called workers have an additional level of or year of experience, which is going to move them into a higher earning bracket as well in terms of the WELS compensation grid. The proposed housing allowance is also included in that number, so that kind of gets folded into there as well. And as well as additional headcount, additional aides to help our school support the Early Child Learning Center that's rapidly growing, as well as the special needs program. So all of that is contributing to the higher cost of wages, kind of prior year to current year to next year. The rest of the budgets are all our board budgets. So Board of Elders, Outreach, Ed, Property Finance, Discipleship, and Stewardship. So each of the board chairmen do kind of a deep dive of their budgets year over year to see what line items in the budget they want to continue forward, which ones they can maybe discontinue, and which ones need adjusting year over year. Overall, you can see that the board budgets, pretty much top to bottom, are pretty consistent budget-wise year over year. The most significant board change in terms of budgeted expenses is for Board of Property. As I mentioned, that's primarily driven to higher utilities costs in terms of kind of utilities, gas, electric, as well as a budgeted increase in our insurance costs for the buildings, property insurance as well. I'll pause there. A lot of information again. Any questions? Hope this all makes sense. Not just freezing you all. All right. So just wanted to provide a quick breakdown of the salaries, wages, and benefits line. So this total would tie to the total we had on the last screen for salaries, wages, and benefits, but just wanted to zone into this a little bit further since it is, roughly, you can see in the bottom right there, roughly 75% of our total operating budget. So we just wanted to kind of show the breakdown of the various costs that go into that line. So again, the top one includes salaries, wages, housing allowance, mileage allowance for all church, school, and ELC associates. And then they're kind of just listed in order of amount. Health insurance was, like I said, one of the other larger increases for the year, just based on the health insurance rates that were out there. Everything else largely in line with prior year. Pete?
The cleaning service. It's listed as wages, but that's a service we employ, correct? We don't hire them.
It is a service, yep, yeah. They're not employees, yeah. That's just where they rolled up in the ledger, so it's easier to tie it there. But yes, they realistically would be on this slide, the operating cost, but just to get everything all the math to work, I put them on the other slide. So then this is a breakdown of, kind of the higher dollar other operating costs that go into the church budget. Electricity, insurance, natural gas, those were three of the main ones I mentioned that we did see somewhat significant increases year over year just based on our assumptions. Maintenance and repairs, there's always projects to be done around the church and school, so that's based on projections from the Board of Property on what we think the imminent needs will be for the year. Various other kind of administrative type costs as well. So much smaller in relation to the greater budget, but just wanted to kind of highlight these as well as some of the other key inputs to the budget. No questions? We'll pull that kind of all together then to just summarize it on the last slide here. So if we sum up basically all of our sources of income that we walked through and all of our expenses that we walked through, you'll see that brings us to a projected operating deficit next year of approximately $40,618 to be exact. And that's where, we would implement a balanced budget. So that's where we would perform transfers from reserve funds that we have to balance the budget to get us to basically net zero to cover our costs for the year. That is the last slide I have. Mark?
What's the dollar amount that's projected to support WISCO for next year?
I have that on my computer. No, it's 6. Thanks, Larry.
impressive.
The, as I recall, it's about $250,000 that we were in the budget this year?
The surplus for this
The
year?
surplus?
Yes.
Is that where we're getting the reserve money down there?
Not currently. We're still figuring out, I think, what the surplus will go to for the current fiscal year. There will be some restrictions if any of that relates to school choice dollars, that it has to be set aside in a reserve fund related to education. So I think we're going through the audit currently. Not currently? Oh, okay. We need to wait the results of that to see if any money needs to be set aside before knowing kind of what the true surplus will be. That can be disposable for the congregation or the school to use. And then I think the bylaws would state that a certain portion of that then would go into memorials.
Gathering, recommendations from boards and committees, church council will be looking at the different options of, there may be some projects that we need to do. There's some deferred maintenance that hasn't been done around here. There's other needs that we haven't done, that we need to look at where that money should be spent. Or should we set, part of it aside for the building fund, or should we do, so it would be something that we're gonna, again, work through get to the end of the year, make sure that, what we're projecting actually comes to be, then go through the audit, to make sure that we understand, this is our first, foray into choice. So we need to get the auditors to tell us what if anything has to be set aside in reserves for the school by DPI rules. And once we have that, then we'll know what the true excess is.
That surplus is not in the next year's budget. It doesn't impact next year's budget. Yep.
It's nice to have to figure out where to put money instead of where to find money. One question I do have on the general fund giving, I know in terms of the numbers of individuals since COVID, we have seen a smaller number. How does it compare general fund wise in terms of, we're talking about giving units or what, over the last several years, we're seeing any increase there? Are the dollars that we're expecting there coming from essentially the same group of people, or are we seeing any more, or don't we have a good handle on it?
Mark, do you have any perspectives?
We're getting a better handle on it right now. We don't, there are so many factors involved with that, but we are looking at the giving ranges and has that shifted or what, but.
Any further questions? All right.
Thank you very kindly.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you for your way too many numbers. Thank you all very
Not a